Seltzer Kings
podcasts.
In the military, veterans answer the call to serve. Now it's our turn. At Hire Heroes USA, they're changing lives, helping veterans and military spouses secure meaningful careers, all at no cost.
With over 100,000 success stories and counting nationwide, they're connecting skilled veterans with employers who recognize their true value. Visit hireheroesusa.org to access their services or to support their mission. Real people making bold moves. Unforgettable journeys into life's next chapter. This is the Second Act Podcast.
Every day is a new chance, mindset on a new path. Anything is possible, any limit I surpass. Everything is in my grasp, I got tunnel vision with a pickaxe. Life is more fun when you live like there's no strings attached.
All right, let's kick things off. Hey, John.
What's up, Michael? How you doing, sir?
Good. New year, 2025.
Yeah.
New guests. New website, secondactmovement.com.
Yeah, you've been a busy bee.
I built it with AI from the ground up. Super exciting. Very cool experience.
You know, we talk about having partners that fill the gaps. And I have a lot of gaps, one of which is anything involving computers, and you fill that so well. So I'm so thankful to have you as a co-host, because not only are you awesome on air to help interview guests, but man, you do so much behind the scenes. You are crushing it on all levels. I literally show up sometimes in my pajamas to do these interviews, and
False.
let's just talk about the importance of good partners, and that conversation starts and ends with Michael Newborn. So
No, we have a codependency, and it's never the same. I've had to do a couple of these without you, John, because you had competing things going on, and it wasn't the same. So when I do get to do it with you, I very much appreciate that experience, because we sort of bring a balance to the conversation with each other.
I think this is the first time we've gushed on each other.
I know, this is a lot of gushing.
That's because we're talking about well-being today, right? Mental health, well-being.
We were talking about well-being. Yes.
I was going to say, with that, we should probably just introduce our guests so that we break up this man crush.
Let's do it. Well, welcome everyone back to the Second Act. I'm excited to introduce our guest today. Today, we are welcoming Ali Schroer, a licensed psychotherapist, founder, and executive director of Mental Scope Consulting, and a dedicated advocate for mental health and well-being. Ali's journey began as an elementary school teacher, where she first witnessed the profound impact that stress and anxiety can have on individuals and families. Driven by a desire to make a deeper difference, she earned her master's in social work from the University of Denver and went on to train at renowned institutions like Children's Hospital Colorado and the Kemp Center. Today, Ali combines over a decade of clinical expertise with real-world insights to help individuals, families, and businesses, including Fortune 500 companies, law firms, high-growth companies, navigate stress, burnout, and performance challenges. She works with corporate leaders, legal professionals, entrepreneurs, and other high achievers to integrate evidence-based strategies with practical tools for resilience, balance, and clarity into their lives and workplaces. Ali currently resides in Colorado with her family and enjoys finding any opportunity to get outside and soak up all the great outdoors we have to offer out here. Welcome to the show, Ali.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. That was a long intro, so I appreciate you kind of getting through all of that as well. Thank you.
Well, you're going to go out on our social channels, and we want everybody to know who you are, and at the end, they'll get to know how to get in touch with you. So we're doing our best to get the word out there for you.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that.
Ali, welcome.
Thank you.
I have a personal question, because you used to be an elementary school teacher. My wife is an elementary school teacher. When you talk about the profound impact that stress and anxiety can have on individuals and families, is that the individuals and families of the teachers or of the kids?
Both, right?
Okay.
I mean, I really think when I first got into kind of the mental health part of this and part of my life and my career, a lot of it was because I was seeing as a teacher first the impact that kids have on adults just as much as adults have on kids. And I entered as a teacher and always wanted to be a teacher because I just really love kids. I love being around them and their energy and how excited they are. And I really learned pretty quickly that when kids are struggling, I always worried about the kid. And what I found was that then the family would struggle as well. And so when you say that, John, it's really kind of a two-way street there, thinking about how the stress of the teachers, how the stress of the kids, how the stress of the kids back to the parents, right? How all of that works in tandem and how it's really kind of a systems approach that we're trying to infiltrate well-being, mental health, all of the good things in life so that people don't struggle or they struggle well.
Well, I know that my wife has taught for many years, 10 plus years, and we have a little system at our house where I try to alleviate some of her stress just by taking a couple things off her plate on a daily basis, and
Yeah.
it seems to do its job, but sometimes those 22 plus kids, have an impact greater than I could ever, mitigate on my end, and I know that sometimes she comes home dealing with that stress from the kids, stress from the parents who are inquisitive about the kids in the classroom,
Uh-huh.
and then she comes home, and then I'm inquisitive about her day, and so I see the stress on the teacher end, but then having
Yeah.
2 boys of my own, I know that exactly what you just said. It's a big system that it
Mhm.
can impact one another and have profound effects.
Absolutely. And I think that the teacher stress is so unique also because teachers, especially of elementary school, they don't get a second to think, right? Like you have to be on all the time. You have to be so reactive. You have to like be in the moment. And so presenteeism is not a problem with many teachers, right? Like they are there, they're ground boots on the ground, if you
Yep.
will. But I think then as teachers then come home and they have a minute to reflect or they have a minute to kind of think about their day or then they start to worry about their students or whether it's reading or writing or the mental well-being of somebody, right? And then you have your own kids and then you have your partners and your spouses, right? All of those pieces. It's like I just
Oh,
need a
yeah.
minute. Don't ask me any more
I
questions.
just need a minute. Yeah. And John's coming in with the inquisitions. Hey, how's it going? How can I
Ask
help
the
you?
teacher, what's going on? She's like, I'm
Just
done
give
with
me a minute.
Yeah.
today. I'm done. Yes.
Well, start us off. Let's go back for a moment, Allie, and let's talk about your childhood. You said you always wanted to be a teacher, which is,
Yeah.
I would say 50-50. What I hear from other teachers. Some grow up and they've always wanted to be a teacher, and then some fall into it through other circumstances. But tell us about your childhood and what got you into that mindset.
Yeah, so I grew up mostly in California, a little bit in Indiana growing up, and always really loved and had kind of a heart for kids even when I was a kid, right? So like I was the kid that was like, "Ooh, a baby. Can I play with them?" Right? I always just wanted to be around other kids. And I came by it naturally. My mom is a therapist, and so that kind of caretaker role was already kind of ingrained, I think, from the get-go, that nature and nurture, right? Probably a little bit of both. And so I always loved school. I loved being at school. I loved the idea and the energy that came with being at school. And so I always kind of assumed that that is the route that I would go so that I could be with kids all the time. And we moved a bit when I was young. And so when we moved from California to Indiana, you can imagine that was quite the culture shock. I was used to, outdoor hallways and being outside for even learning a lot of the
Yeah.
day to indoors all day, except for maybe, 20 minutes of outside recess and things like that. So that was a huge shift for me, and I personally, as a kid, I was a 3rd grader, and I really struggled with that shift and that change, and so from my own experience, even as a student, understanding how much I struggled then led to my family struggling, right? My mom was trying to support me, and then it was a new job for my dad, and my sister's trying to do her own thing and be a good sister, and, it really does when one person struggles in your family, or not even in your family, in your I would say your self-created family even, right? Your unit, your community that you're intimately close with, we all struggle. And that happened to me personally when I was in 3rd grade and I was really struggling with the move and the change and leaving California and the outdoors. And so at that point, I had a terrible teacher, long story short, terrible teacher when I moved to Indiana and it switched. I ended up switching schools and got a wonderful teacher. And really, that's when I realized not only have I always loved kids in school, except for that terrible teacher, I loved my third grade teacher, and the impact she had on my life was profound. I mean, I came back to myself and thriving and very happy again with, being under her guidance and her support through all of that transition time. So that really kind of paved the way to it just made sense to be an educator and to do those things. And that grew and grew through having good teachers and bad teachers in the future going, nope, I'm not going to be like you. And yes, I want to be like you. And being able to do those things, I think, was really helpful in kind of carving out my path as an educator and trying to work with kids.
It was interesting to hear you say, if there's one member of the unit that's struggling, whether they're sort of doing that in a way where it's verbalized or you can physically see emotional reactions to things versus someone who's thinks that they're being like reserved about it, holding it in, it's still felt. And it's almost like that sixth sense that appears within the unit and can tell that something is not right. I would love if you could share a little bit more of your thoughts on people's perspective around that and how maybe elements of that led you through teaching and then pivoting into what you're doing today.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, when we think about people that are struggling, and I'm talking kind of across the spectrum, right? There's mental health disorders, and there's also people that are just in a challenging moment or in a challenging season. And really, no matter kind of where you fall on that spectrum at any given time, you can kind of display that in either a covert or an overt way, in my opinion, right? So the overt way being more obvious, right? That maybe they're lashing out, or you're yelling, or you're crying, or you're not eating, or you're hitting, right? If you're a little kid or maybe even a big kid, right? Um, but
Yeah.
so you're kind of showing what is going on with you in your emotion. That absolutely impacts the family system, the school system, the work system, because people start to get nervous or scared or overwhelmed, or they're trying to figure out how do I help or how do I back off? Right. And so it affects all of us. So if you think of us like a soup, right? If you put in an ingredient that you don't want in that soup, it's going to change the taste. And so that's when we see those overt things really happening. Now, the covert side of things, right, the sneaky side, if you will, are when kids or people are struggling, again, even professionals. And they're struggling, and it's not something tangible. It's like felt. It's like your spidey sense goes off of like something is going on. This doesn't feel good. This doesn't feel right. Right. Or they're short, and you're like, hey, man, how's it going? They're like, fine. You're like, oh, how do
Where do I
I,
go with
right?
that? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And so those kind of covert moments of struggling, whether again, mental health or just kind of on the spectrum of life, those things absolutely still change that taste in the soup, if you will, right? It may not be chunks of potatoes that you can see. We may be talking about too much salt or too much basil, and you're like, I can't see it, but something's in there that I don't like and it doesn't match, right? It's that same feeling. And so it does impact the greater piece of who we are as a community, as colleagues, and certainly in schools and with kids as well.
Using myself as an example of someone who can be processing information and dealing with things that are irritating me or angering me or whatever internally. And I'm maybe more the fine person or like, I'm not talking right now kind of person versus someone else who is either in your unit or in your family or whatever sort of group you're in that is going to share everything that's aggravating them and they want you to share the things that are aggravating you and like how do you
Mhm.
work through that dynamic.
I mean, it's tricky, right? Everybody has a different way to approach how they struggle. And so that's why I talk a lot about like struggling well, right?
Yeah.
We can't say that you're never going to struggle. You're never going to have a bad day or something bad is not going to happen in your life. That is just part of life. But we want to struggle in a way that is you can still like kind of come out the other side of it, right? And that you can mitigate some of those impacts for colleagues, for your work life, for your classroom, whatever it may be, so that you can handle it. And so there are people, the overts and the coverts, if you will, right? There are kind of these two different camps of how people process. And when those are in conflict, it can get messy. You're like, just talk to me, just talk to me. And they're like, I don't want to talk to you. You're making it worse. Right. And so trying to kind of fine tune and figure out how do you speak the language of the person who needs the support is really sometimes challenging and really unique. And actually, that's a lot of what I do. We talked kind of my bio in the big picture. A lot of what I do for organizations is thinking about with leadership. I say, call me, it's the easy button, right? It's like, I don't know what to do with this, Allie, right? And leaders will call and say, hey, so and so is struggling, not unlike what happens in a family. And I'm trying to get them to talk, or I don't know what to ask and I don't want to make them talk, right? And what I'm coaching and teaching them is how do we speak that person's language so that you can all come to the table and figure out a way to support them, whether that's having a candid conversation, whether that's leaving them notes of support, whether that's giving them space and trying to give them some room so they can figure it out on their own. It looks really different in a family and wherever you may be. And it takes some finesse and some time to figure out how to speak the language of the person that's struggling.
Ellie, I'm glad you brought up kind of your corporate experience because I want to talk about shift that we saw during COVID and then the shift out of COVID. So work from home 100% to now we're going back to maybe working from home and doing some in the office. But I know that had a profound impact on their abilities to socialize, right? And their abilities to communicate, whether overtly or covertly, and really have those interactions with people face to face. And now we're caught doing everything on Zoom and communications kind of breaking down. How did you see that shift and navigate that shift? And then what are you implementing now as people shift maybe back to this hybrid model? And how are you seeing that on the grand scale for corporations?
Yeah, that's a complex question, but it's a great question. And I would say it's the right question, John, because we are trying to figure out how do we navigate through these kind of different stages that we've had. I will say at least the three of us on this call as professionals trying to hybrid what this looks like now for building community, having communication professionally, certainly with all the changes that are happening with technology. And so pre-COVID, I was actually kind of giving you a little bit more about my work life. I was actually doing some of this work in corporate America. I was working with hospitals at the time and trying to actually teach doctors and other medical professionals about well-being and mental health, not just from like the DSM, which is the diagnostic manual for mental health, not just about that for their patients, but about for themselves, right? Starting to
Sure.
think about stress and burnout and some of those pieces. And then COVID hit, and it was like, everybody was like, hey, don't you do something about mental health? Maybe could we call you and could you do a thing? Sure, right? So it did start to pivot because we've realized the impact that our mental health and our own well-being would have if something happened in the world. It no longer felt like, okay, you're allowed to have a mental health thing if you're really, really struggling or if like someone dies. But outside of that, like we kind of figure it out, right? And the world shifted into starting to say, oh my gosh, every single human on the planet has mental health and has well being. And that's like a thing. And we should probably start paying attention to that because that impacts all of the things. That's the ripple effect,
Yeah.
right? And so during COVID, that's when my mental scope consulting that really started to grow because organizations were seeing if my people, if my coworkers, colleagues, high performing professionals are not doing well, guess what? Business struggles and clients struggle. And then we don't make as much money and the bottom line is hurt and all of those pieces. And so as we talk here today in 2025, we all kind of say, duh, of course, right? But in 2020, that was like a new novel idea of wait a second, somebody's mental health and well being could be impacting how they come to work. Who knew? And so, to your point and your question of how did we pivot or how are we continuing to pivot, I think it really did shine a light. And I know a lot of people talk about this, but it did shine a light on that mental health and well being is something that all of us have, just like we have two arms, right? And so it's just something that we can talk about as like a commonality rather than a differentiator or a decisive topic that's really, needs to be swept under the rug. So it really did bring that to light, not just for individuals, but for organizations. And now the question is, to your exact point, even with hybrid work and being telehealth and what all that means, is how does it bring it to light? We know it's a thing, but what do we do with it? And that is really the question that has evolved over the last few years is, okay, let's say we're all back in person. So now what does that mean? Should we connect more? Are we already connecting more? Should we make people connect more? Should we do more happy hours? Should we do less happy hours? Because maybe we shouldn't do that because we don't want to make people do that. So there's all these questions now that are on the kind of horizon and leaders are talking about of like, what do we do? What's the secret formula for success? And it is very individualized, certainly for organizations, of what works best for your people. There was a sign that I saw, I believe it was Spotify, that said, we treat our employees as adults. And so we're going to remain remote. And I was like, well, that's an interesting way to articulate that, right? Could be true for your organization, but that doesn't mean that it's true for another organization. And so now, as people are even, maybe it's a completely virtual company that you're with, well, how should we connect? Should we not connect? Should we connect more? Like all those same questions come
Yeah.
up. And so I think it's an interesting topic, but a complex answer of what should we be doing to try to support our people. And the number one thing I would say is that there has to be a way to ask and start talking to your leadership team, start talking to your organization of what actually works for our company and our organization for the work that we do. And that will help drive some of the decisions for that specific team or that company.
I would think that this would be a perfect opportunity for a company to come in and be very transparent about their culture, right? Their culture now is gonna play a part as they paint the transparent picture about how their company operates before an employee actually puts that brand on their chest, but that culture now speaks to some of those questions that come up
Yes.
and speaks to some of the, I would say, grayer issues about how the company is going to operate. Is that what you're seeing? Is culture playing a bigger part in the recruiting process so that employees know what they're getting into before they sign on?
Yes, absolutely. And the question then for those companies is what is our culture? And so many are like, I mean, we don't actually know, right? Like, shoot, we should probably define that. We should probably decide what our culture is rather than having it be happenstance. And so I think it is a great question. And it's also a question that a lot of individual people are asking when they're interviewing and going through that process. But it doesn't mean that the company has the answer because they're still trying to figure it out.
Which, you know, it's okay. It's okay to be in that spot for anybody that has a company and is listening and thinking, "Oh, I better define my culture and my
Right.
impact." It's okay. That isn't
Yeah,
something that you have to have set in stone, and it's not something that has to be immovable. It can be kind of a
exactly.
living document as you bring
Yep,
on more clients and as you figure out how the individuals are impacting and the families are being impacted by, the employer and things like that. So,
absolutely. Yes, I totally agree with you. And it should be a living document, right? It should be evolving with with the people that you hire and the leadership changes and the style that those people bring. Yeah, I think the culture should evolve, but having kind of a general sense of what you're hoping for, I think that is probably as good as many companies are going to get is just trying to have an overview of like we hope to be like X. What that means in the weeds, we'll figure that out as we
yeah.
go.
Well, as you're talking to these companies, Fortune 500 companies and
Mhm.
bigger. What is I mean, Michael mentioned navigating stress, burnout, performance challenges, right? All hot topics in today's corporate
Yeah.
world, but is there a reoccurring theme that you're seeing more often than not, or something that the leadership is asking you to speak on, that seems to be coming up often?
Yes. And actually the kind of data and the numbers will speak to this as well, is that anxiety is on the
Mm,
rise for humans, absolutely
wow.
in North America. And so that is not unique just to businesses and corporations. We see that in schools. We see that with tiny, tiny kids. We see that with parenting. We even are seeing it in elderly. And so we're seeing it across the lifespan that anxiety is from a mental health standpoint, that is the number one kind of piece that we are concerned about and looking at and using the evidence-based strategies to address. And companies are no different. They're saying, hey, we as leaders feel like we get anxious about things and we're constantly looking in the future of, well, what if this and what if that and what if this? And anxiety is actually driven by a future lens. It's all about what's going to happen. And so they will come to me and say, could you equip us? Could you teach us about anxiety and how to get ahead of it?
Sure.
What are some strategies? What are some skills from a team standpoint, from an individual standpoint, from a leadership standpoint? How do we arm ourselves to handle how we feel and how our teams are also feeling in relationship to our work? So I spend a lot of time doing that.
Wow. You said something I find very interesting because, I spent 20 years in the Marine Corps. Anxiety is not something that's talked about extensively, right? And if it is, it's that person's usually an outlier, right? But now that I've been out of the military, I hear anxiety a lot more, and I think, oh, that's a younger generational thing, right? That's a younger leadership thing. That's one of those hot topics that people throw out there, and it doesn't really affect me. But you said that you see it a lot more in elderly. And so I wouldn't think that because I would think, oh, our elderly are resilient and they came from a harder, harder, they're part of a harder generation and
Sure.
they've seen things way harder than we could ever imagine. So what is causing, if you could dial it down to a couple things, what is causing so much anxiety across the spectrum from our infants to our elderly?
That is a absolute question that is a hot topic in many circles that I run, and there's a few pieces. One would be that technology absolutely plays a role here. That the pace of our worlds and the pace of our existence and our inability in some ways and our attempt to be in the present moment is really challenging. So if you think of anxiety as a future thing, right? The what ifs that are coming down the pipeline. And then you are getting pinged all the time about future things. And you're waiting and anticipating getting pinged about more things. All of that adds to this anxiety kind of
Sure.
mindset that we start to shift to the future rather than our ability to be present. So for the elderly, historically, even if you kind of take the technology piece out of it, elderly can have a higher propensity for anxiety because they can get confused, right? We're starting to talk about cognitive decline.
Sure.
And so then the confusion can create some anxiety, as it would for any one of us. If I started to get confused of where I was, you betcha I would start to feel anxious, right? But you couple that with the pace of the world and the pace of technology of saying, hey, your doctor's appointment is at noon today, and you are going to get an email to confirm, and you need to check in on your email to confirm an hour ahead of time that you have all your paperwork. They are anticipating that 12 o'clock meeting. Then they're anticipating that their email. Then what if their email's not working? Then they're not connected to Wi-Fi. Oh, are you connected to Wi-Fi? What's Wi-Fi? I need to be on Wi-Fi, right? Oh, but you have to fill out your paperwork online now? Well, how do I fill my paperwork out online? Right? All of those pieces are adding to a lot of angst
Sure.
for that older generation. And as technology continues to evolve and even go faster, I mean, AI, my goodness, ask anyone over the age of, 60, 65, 70 in that age range about AI. They may know a lot. They may be really up on it. They may be very bright. It's not that piece. It's just the pace in which that happens can create a lot of angst of, now what am I supposed to do with this information?
Every day, thousands of Comcast engineers and technologists, like Kunle, put people at the heart of everything they create.
In the average household, there are dozens of connected devices. Here in the Comcast family, we're building an integrated in-home Wi-Fi solution for millions of families like my own. It brings people together in meaningful ways.
Kunle and his team are building a Wi-Fi experience that connects 1 billion devices every year. Learn more about how Comcast is redefining the future of connectivity at comcastcorporation.com/Wi-Fi.
The spirit of innovation is deeply ingrained in America, and Google is helping Americans innovate in ways both big and small. Central Texas Regional Mobility Authority is using Google AI to create smarter tolling systems and improve traffic flow for Texans. This is a new era of American innovation. Find out more at g.co/American innovation.
So I'll jump right into the technology stuff because that's something that I'm very familiar with, and we're talking about that in the context of the elderly. But I think, have we covered technology across the range of demographics? And now you're having generations of people born into the world of technology where they're being fed things 24/7 in their pockets around things that are designed to make them want to look at more of whatever that is.
That's right.
And that can be stress relieving or stress inducing, depending on what it is. And that applies to everybody, kids, adults, older generations. So you layer that on top of this sort of weird pandemic and exit out of the pandemic in terms of work environments and schooling environments. And you have this sort of whole new world to deal with. And there's books being written about it. Allie, you're an expert in helping people understand the importance of mental health. And I remember one thing when we met that I think immediately connected us on a human level, in that when you're getting a little bit stressed out or work things are piling up, you like to go out and take a call while you're looking at a tree, looking at nature.
Yes.
And I was like, we are
Yes.
friends just because you
Yes.
said that. And I think
Yeah.
people are becoming more authentic with and real with themselves and with others about, hey, we're human beings. We're not machines. We're not robots. We need nature. We need downtime. We need elements that are not tied to technology to help us. And I would love if you would share more about this, because I know you also have a really clever way of thinking about your personal recipes that I don't know if we're going to get into on this show as well. But
Okay.
yeah, sorry, that
Yeah.
was a lot.
Yeah, no worries. Yes, I completely agree with you. I think the human part of humanity, I guess I would say, right? The humanity piece of all of us is that we have to have things outside of technology. We have to have things that connect us back to the earth, and they connect us back to nature, and they connect us back to things that move slowly as well as things that move quickly. But when we spend a lot of time in the space that things move quickly, we're missing part of the things that help us to be in balance, right? It's the yin and the yang, if you will. And so you're right, Michael. I do things like I go outside. I will stand if I have 10 minutes in between patients or phone calls. I will stand and stare at a tree. And I'm like, look, is that a bird? Huh, the trees are starting to turn color, right? Like, otherwise I miss it. And so I do a lot of those kind of moments, these mindfulness moments or whatever practice you want to call it, right? Mine is just nature. Just stand outside. I'll feel better. But any of that just helps you to kind of slow the pace of what's going on around you. And bringing it back, John, to the anxiety piece, we know that anxiety, especially with our younger generations, is on the rise. And part of that is because when we give them technology and we're using technology, even in a positive way as a tool, it is still so instantaneous that we are not giving them that opportunity for their brain to develop and to notice the slow things in life as well. And we need to have both of those pieces. And so, again, I mean, no pressure teachers, no pressure schools, parents, right? All of us, as we try to do all of those things, it's really, really challenging. But if you marry these two things that we're talking about, if you marry this idea of kids, families, communities, and parenting, and you look at that in conjunction with the work side, we're talking about one and the same, right? The people that make up our workforce are the same people that we're talking about in the other side of the coin. They still have kids, they still have elderly, they still have families, they still have loved ones that are all struggling with these same topics. And so I'm kind of veering here for a second, but the reason that I kind of swung my career from elementary education into corporate America and thinking about mental health is because I was trying to hit all of that at once. And I said, how can we reach more people more strategically, quite honestly, like at a faster rate than just working with the kids? How can I help the greater good and humanity at a bigger level? Well, I can also hit the parents. And if I can hit the workforce, then we also know that parents will pay attention, especially if work is paying for it and work is paying for mental health and well being. We are increasing the capacity on the work side, and we're helping the families, which helps the kids, which helps the teachers, which helps our community. I was like, well, let's give it a shot and see what happens. And here we are, right? 5 years later, and that model works. And thank goodness for me, I haven't had to do the research to prove that because everybody else is already doing that research. But I think that's a long way, Michael, of saying when we look at mental health and well being from any of these kind of lenses, what we're trying to hit at is how do we look at something holistically and how do we give people tools or the recipe, if you want to, right? The recipe of life. How do we have our own recipes for success as human beings? And that is not something that you can only do as a lawyer or a tech giant or whatever it may be. It's really just a human experience thing.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was introduced to mindfulness tools through a Navy SEAL commander. So it took that kind of persona to help me think that, okay, maybe there's something to this, because the counterbalance to that that's fed all over the internet and that tends to get into the news media is like, hey, here's this entrepreneur that's working 100 hours a week and they're crushing it. And it's like one out of 1,000 stories, but it's the one that gets all the attention. And maybe there's some windfalls associated with that. But there's some other people that it's probably affecting that kind of lifestyle in a really negative way. And I love your approach that everything is sort of personalized and sort of custom to that person and their community and their family. And for me, aside from it being that type of persona and learning about some of these tools, the performance aspects of it, slowing down to speed up, if you will, and being where your feet are and looking at that tree, like noticing things and bringing you into the present, really helps your thinking and your reactions to things. And tell us more about, well, one, I want to know, I don't know if we covered the pivot for like, what was the moment you went from like, hey, I'm not going to be a teacher anymore. I'm going to be helping others from a mental health perspective, but two, sort of, if you can tie that into like the performance elements, because that's what you do each and every day is help high performers and teams and businesses get better through these practices.
Yeah, the pivot really came when I was teaching and I realized that I cared a lot more about the social emotional piece of my students than I did their reading and writing scores. And so, a kid would come in. I had a student at the time I was teaching third grade, and a student came in and they had a tough family situation going on. And I was like, this kid needs community. This kid needs some support. And so every day we started with like a class meeting of like highs and lows and what's going on in our world and how we can support each other. And we're, 9. And so I saw the impact of that and then pretty quickly said, that's actually what I want to spend my time doing is helping people think about their own social and emotional well-being as well as how that impacts others. And so that's when I went back to graduate school at DU and entered into clinical social work and started doing some of those pieces. And I continued to teach for a while. I was an adjunct professor at the University of Denver because I still like the classroom and I still love that kind of school feel. But that's when I really realized I wanted to spend more time thinking about the mental health and how that impacts everything. And so, I was in private practice. I still have a private practice here in Denver area. But the kind of piece for me was really thinking about, all right, private practice and mental health is so quiet and siloed and private and individualized, which is all a fine thing. That's not bad, except for it's a numbers game. We are reaching one person at a time. And I want to have a greater impact. I want like a bigger bang for my buck, if you will. And that's when I really started to see. So I guess there were like two pivots, right? I left teaching to do mental health. And then I left kind of the primary model of mental health to do corporate mental health because I wanted a bigger bang for my buck. And so I figured, why can I not apply the evidence-based practices of mental health to a corporation and see a corporation in the same way I see family therapy? And let's see if it works. And turns out it works really, really well. And so when we start to see it that way and I pivoted that way, that's when I kind of grew organically and companies will just call now and it's like, hey, can you do, most of the time they have no idea what they need. And they just say, hey, can you do something with mental health and can you help us? And like, we think we need something, maybe it's like to check a box with a CEU and like CLEs, or maybe it's because they have a leadership that somebody experienced something, who knows? Whatever the reason is, can you help our culture, right? We want an award. All those kind of things, people reach out, and then hopefully we're creating kind of this stir in their organization to really get at how do we support people for the bigger bang for their buck. Now, saying all that, Michael, and then getting to the point about performance, it does impact performance. There was a leader of a international law firm that I worked with that said to me, "So your job, if I got this right, is to make sure that our brains are intact so that we can bring good work to our clients." And I said, "Yes, that's exactly right. I keep your brains in good working order so you can deliver the best thing that you can deliver to clients in the legal profession for them."
That's great.
And he was like, "That's smart." I said, "Well, you would hope so, right? Like, that's what you're going for here." He was like, "Well, can I use that to pitch that to clients?" Sure. You can, I mean, that's the truth, right? You have somebody that is checking in on your professionals so that they can perform to the highest level. And there was actually a situation that I was working with a lawyer who was in the middle of a huge trial. This is, I mean, buku bucks, right? Like a huge case, and had a family tragedy happen. And so called and said, like, "I don't know what to do. Like, I think I need to take a leave, but I can't take a leave. And like, I'm so stressed. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. And I like, my head is in the sand, right? Like, I can't even focus. What do I do?" And so we worked together and we got to a working place, and they ended up winning the trial, and they didn't go on leave, and everything turned out. And those are the cases for business of that businesses then say, okay, so we can still crush it even with life happening. And we can still help our high performers even in the midst of whatever's going on, either in their world or in their families or whatever it may be. And so that helps certainly the bottom line, but that also helps think of the kind of power that that individual attorney now has, because they face something that was incredibly difficult in their life and still crushed it at work. And how empowered they feel now of their own capabilities to face whatever's coming their way.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, it's just good all
Yep.
around. So that's what we're trying to kinda see that a little bit more readily. We're seeing that more with leadership, kind of connecting that, but that's what I spend a lot of my time doing.
Allie, what do you say to the leader who calls you up and says, "Hey, I need you to come talk to my organization, and I don't know how else to guide you."
Yeah.
What's the process?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been doing this long enough now. I have, I don't know, 50 talks of some sort that I hybrid and tailor to their audience and who's gonna be there. But usually I do give them like here's where a lot of people like to start because they have no idea, right? And one of the things that we can do, there's actually a few wonderful surveys that are out there. I also have a survey myself for my company that I will use that kind of gives us a little bit, I call it like a health assessment, right? So we're really starting to do a health assessment first to see where are you thriving and where do you, are you struggling? And so we can start to tailor things for that organization. But there's also just like an equipping series of like help people speak mental health and well-being. Somebody's going dark. What do I do? Right? I can start with just some workshop pieces for leaders.
Because I'm sure they don't know where to start. And
They don't.
having
Yes.
yeah, having somebody to help hold their hand
Yeah.
gives them a little bit of clarity to work from.
Yeah.
Or they may have a perspective of what they think they want to get out of mental health to help
Yeah.
them that is actually completely inaccurate. And I can think of my own personal circumstance where I had one perspective on something. I shared my thoughts, and the response I'll never forget from that individual was, "Why would you ever want to operate like that? It's a recipe for burnout." And I was like,
Yeah.
very interesting, because I thought that
Yeah.
was what was needed to take it to the next level.
Right.
So it was one of those moments for me. I was like, wow, I had like an instant paradigm shift on a couple of things. That was pretty cool.
Well, that's kind of what you just said a few minutes ago too, of like part of what I try to do, especially for high performers, is learn how to go slow so that you can go fast, right? And that probably was some sort of messaging included in there with that burnout model of, right, you can't go 100 miles an hour 7 days a week. That is a recipe for burnout, even for top performers that think that they are
Right.
invincible. They won't be, right? Life happens or you get the flu, right? And then what? And so there has to be enough flexibility in your consistency for excellence that you can still be flexible and you can learn how to go slow to go fast.
Ali, what are the exciting things you have going on this year for Mental Scope Consulting?
Yeah, I mean, I like doing all the things, right? This is why I like working with top performers is because I'm type A as well. And so I like to have a lot of, things going on at once. But I'm trying to continue to grow in figuring out what are those workshops, what are those presentations, if you will, as kind of that starter pack that is the most effective for organizations. And so I'm building out what's called the Mental Health Ready Equipping Series. And it's a series of kind of 3 different ways that organizations can, kind of hire as a starter pack, if you will, myself or my team, and think about how are we going to impact the individual, the organization, and your clients or whoever you work with. A lot of the industries that I work with are client services. And so, for like financial organizations, for example, tech companies, and so trying to figure out how can we kind of have the trifecta and hit all 3 of those things. And I think what we have created with the equipping series is a great start. So I'm going to continue to build that out. We just, in conjunction with one of the organizations that we work with, which is Fakery Drinker, Biddle and Heath, it's an international law firm, and I'm their well-being advisor and therapist for them. And they, in conjunction with the work that we've done, we just won a big award from AmLaw for their inaugural Well-Being and Mental Health
Wow.
and Workplace Culture Award.
Congrats.
And so I
Congratulations.
hope to, thank you. So I hope to continue to kind of grow off of that as well and say, people are noticing and people are seeing that this does make an impact and it actually does affect people and business. So I hope to continue to kind of grow in that regard as well.
Well, I hope you make some inroads into tech because the pings and the dings, as the people maybe fueling some of the things that cause mental health issues, I think the
Right.
tech industry could learn some important lessons from your expertise and the benefits of slowing down to speed up and all of the things that you bring to the table. I know I would have myself learned had we met at the time I was at a big, fast-growing tech company, learn from you. So yes, that sounds like an amazing opportunity for you and your company.
Yeah, thank you.
Ali, I know your time is incredibly valuable. You're backing up to a phone call or to a meeting, and we are so gracious to have you on the podcast. But before we let you go, we always try to capture with all of our guests some practical advice or tips or tricks from those people that are contemplating a shift like you shifted from teaching to coaching in and out of the corporate world. But what advice would you give to somebody who's on the edge, trying to get into something new, maybe wanting to start their second act? And how would you advise them, thinking about your experience?
That's a great question. I would say there's kind of 2 pieces that I would consider. One is really coming from this mental health lens right out of the gate. What's stopping you, right?
Ah,
What's
that's
the
good.
fear? And if you can ask yourself, if you can name it, usually the fear is rooted in something pretty kind of tangible or that can come to consciousness. So the fear is a financial stress, right? I can't pivot because I'm worried about the financial piece. Okay, plan for it, right? Then it no longer has to be a fear. Or I'm worried about the judgment. Okay, start asking some of the experts who are doing the things that you want to do. And then you don't have to worry about the judgment because you're armed with information and knowledge. So I would ask yourself, what is the fear? What's stopping you from jumping, right? And leaping into this. And then see if you can address it. Is it that your partner or your spouse is going to be upset? Is it that your parents are going to be upset? Is it whatever it is, right? And if you can address it, that will give you a lot more courage to move forward. The other thing that I would say is that I've done in my own kind of practice and my own work is that I try to listen and learn from the people that are smarter than me, right? There are a lot of people that are smarter than me. And I am a lifelong learner. I really enjoy learning. I enjoy reading, right? And so when I can ask questions from people who do it better or smarter than I do, I absolutely jump at that. I don't have fear about that. I have no problem saying I'm not the smartest person in the room because that's how we all learn. And so if you are wondering how to do this or how to gather that information, I would say start looking, right? Google, start who does this? Does anybody do this? How do I do it? Right? And ping them. And those people that reach out to me that ask me questions, I try to really make time for them too, because I think they're smart to ask. So I would say if you can listen and learn from people smarter than you or people who are doing what you want to do, go out there and ask. There's no harm in asking.
Great advice.
I love that. Name it, plan for it, address it. I mean, such such action-oriented call-outs there for somebody to get started in what they're doing. And I appreciate you kind of boiling it down to something as condensed as those 3 action steps. So that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, hopefully that helps people to kind of move them forward and think about how they can leap, right? For me personally, if I dream about something and I continue to dream about it, usually after, I don't know, 2 or 3 dreams, I'm like, all right, I guess I'm doing the thing,
I
right?
love it.
I'm like, I got to do it. It's on my mind. I will figure out a way. I am maybe notorious, maybe it's good news to say that I will figure it out. Right? I rely on myself to figure it out, and that has served me well so far. Hopefully it continues to do so. But I think the gumption that comes with that allows me some of that freedom to try it.
With that said, Allie, if people just can't figure it out on their own and they want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Yes. Yeah, they can email me directly at allie@mentalscopeconsulting.com, or they're welcome to go to mentalscopeconsulting.com website, and they can send me a message there as well. And my phone number is listed there, but I'd be happy to talk with anybody who either has questions about this or questions about corporate mental health and how I can, best serve the world and serve their organization as well.
Awesome.
Good.
It was such a pleasure having you on today, Allie. Thank you for carving out some time and jumping on
You
with us.
bet.
This was fun.
You
I
bet.
learned
Thank
a ton,
you.
Allie.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Oh, good. Good. Thank you both for having me. I really appreciate the time, and hopefully people found it useful and helpful.
I'm sure they will.
They will.
With
Well,
that
Michael.
said, it's time to sign off, John.
Yeah, buddy. A great episode. I appreciate you and all the things you're doing to help us grow and keep going and keeping my mental sanity at bay. So thank you for that. And thanks for Allie for being on the show. And man, I look forward to next week.
All right. Till then.
See ya.
See ya.
The Second Act with Michael and John stars Michael Newborn and John Ballenger. The podcast is produced by Seltzer Kings. For more information on the show, check out michaelandjohn.com, or if you'd like to get involved in the conversation, give the guys a shout on their socials at The Second Act Movement on most platforms. Thanks for listening.
Seltzer Kings.
Podcasts.